Madoff was a Wall Street titan who not only fooled a handful of investors, but trapped celebrities, financial institutions, and even charities. We are talking about a man whose morals are nowhere to be found. Guess it's a tad bit overstretched to expect some decency from criminals for not robbing charitable organizations. Sneak peek into the crimes of Bernie Madoff. Almost $65 billion in a span of 20 years. That is a huge sum of money. Some of us might not even know how many zeros would be in there. But Madoff did it. He collected this whooping sum of money from people without any intention of investing them ever. Like any other con man, Bernie promised his investors that they would receive a huge sum of money in exchange for this investment. People fall for such scams easily. In a world where everyone wants to be rich and make money overnight, investing some cash in return of a double-triple return does not seem a bad deal to someone blinded by lust for money. It's not a bad thing, to be honest, but falling for such gimmicks certainly makes one look like a fool. But Madoff was good at his game. It was most likely for people to trust a man with an impeccable reputation and a seat as chairman of NASDAQ. There was no chance someone would have doubted him, least of all his investors. But that trust would prove to be the foundation of one of the most intricate financial deceptions the world has ever known. Madoff's scheme was, at its heart, simple. He promised steady, almost too good to be true returns, but with a twist that made it seem credible. Rather than high, volatile profits, Madoff offered modest yet consistent gains year after year, even when the market was crashing. It seemed like he had cracked the code to financial success, and investors flocked to him. Banks, hedge funds, even philanthropists trusted him with their fortunes. See, guys, even the fraudsters know that simplicity is the key. So what happened next? Time was running fast. Madoff was making money like crazy on a huge scale, to an extent that he made Charles Ponzi look like an amateur. The thing with fraudsters is they leave behind their masters in excellence. Instead of using his clients' money to trade stocks, he funneled the cash to pay off earlier investors, keeping the illusion alive. And with every new investor, the cycle continued. All these years of scam, and no one could catch Madoff. Seems spooky, isn't it? Was America's legal system that flawed? A lot of people would answer that question with the same sweeping statements. Oh, Madoff was clever and very strategic, but strategic one has to be to fool hundreds of people for decades. Was he too smart, or were the people around him too dumb? There is no doubt that Madoff knew how to play the system. He kept his firm's operations highly secretive, and his clients were sworn to secrecy. They were told that if people found out, the lucrative returns would dry up. Instead of raising eyebrows, this exclusivity created an air of mystique. People felt lucky to be part of it. And guess what? It worked for years. Not just that, one of the reasons Madoff wasn't caught earlier was the sheer brilliance of his scheme's structure. He hand-picked investors and ensured they didn't ask too many questions. He sent out falsified account statements that looked legitimate, and even when the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, investigated him several times, he managed to slip through their fingers. His standing in the financial world was so high that no one could believe he was capable of such deceit. The world of deceit isn't built by just one person, it has hard work of many others. So did Madoff's. He did not act alone. While he was the face of the operation, some of his close family members, including his brother and two sons, worked within the firm. His brother, Peter Madoff, was the chief compliance officer at the firm, a position that, in theory, should have made him responsible for ensuring everything ran above board. Yet, despite the scale of the deception, Peter claimed he had no knowledge of the massive Ponzi scheme. He trusted his older brother implicitly, as did many others, but his position at the firm made it difficult for people to believe that he wasn't aware of any wrongdoing. When Madoff's empire crumbled, Peter was later sentenced to 10 years in prison for his involvement, though he maintained his ignorance of the larger fraud. Then there were Bernie's sons, Mark and Andrew Madoff, who also worked within the company. From the outside, they appeared to be reputable businessmen running the legitimate side of their father's firm. However, the extent of their involvement in the Ponzi scheme remains a subject of intense debate. The brothers claim they were completely unaware of the scam and that their father kept them in the dark about the fraudulent part of the business. In fact, they were the ones who turned Bernie Madoff into the authorities in 2008 after he confessed his crimes to them. It was a shocking moment as his sons, who had benefited from the family business for years, had to confront the horrifying reality that their father had built his wealth on lies. Whether Madoff's family members knew the full extent of the scam remains a topic of debate. What's certain is that Bernie Madoff's empire of lies was a ticking time bomb, one that would eventually explode, but not before he ruined thousands of lives. And the fallout, when it came, was devastating. Falling of the great empire. It is a universal fact. Everything that reaches its peak has to fall. Good and bad days exist for everyone, and for someone whose empire was built on deceit and fraud, a downfall was written in the stars. Don't skip the video yet, because we are looking closely at the fall of the great Madoff. We like to think that one day Bernie Madoff woke up and all hell was loose. That was not the case. The downfall of Bernie Madoff was not a sudden collapse, but a gradual unraveling, like pulling a single thread that caused an entire fabric to fall apart. It began quietly, with whispers of doubt and suspicion, but when the truth emerged, it sent shockwaves across the globe. Madoff's firm was a fortress of secrecy and exclusivity that gave him an edge of never being questioned. Nobody ever asked him, "Dude, how does this magic work?" Little did they know that dear old Bernie was not investing money, instead taking new investors' funds to pay off earlier ones. A textbook Ponzi scheme. As long as fresh money kept pouring in, the scheme worked. However, everything began to crumble in 2008 when the global financial crisis hit. The market collapsed and people started panicking. There was a sense of fury everywhere. It seemed people had lost it. Investors who had trusted Madoff with millions suddenly needed their money back. Withdrawals flooded in, and Madoff was faced with an impossible problem. There was no money to return. His entire operation was built on smoke and mirrors, and now those mirrors were shattering. Madoff had always managed to stay one step ahead, all thanks to his charm and reputation, but these things don't help in bearing pressure. He was juggling billions of dollars in fake returns, and without new investors, his house of cards started to wobble. He tried to stall, assuring his clients that everything was fine, but they wanted their money, and he didn't have it. By December 2008, the game was over. Madoff could no longer keep up the pretense, and he made a shocking decision. One evening, he gathered his family in his Manhattan penthouse and confessed everything. He admitted that his entire investment firm was nothing more than a lie, a giant Ponzi scheme that had spiraled out of control. It was, in fact, Bernie's own sons who turned their father in. The next morning, on December 11, 2008, Bernie Madoff was arrested by federal authorities. The financial world was stunned. How could a man so respected, so trusted, have pulled off a scam of this magnitude? The news spread like wildfire, and soon everyone knew Bernie Madoff was a fraud. The aftermath was brutal. As investigators began to dig deeper, they uncovered the staggering scope of Madoff's crime. He had swindled nearly $65 billion from his clients, making it the largest Ponzi scheme in history. His victims were left in financial ruin, their life savings wiped out overnight. Many of them had trusted Madoff with everything, never imagining he could betray them so deeply. The courts moved swiftly, and in 2009, Madoff was sentenced to 150 years in prison. But for many of his victims, justice was a cold comfort. Their money was gone, and the man they had once admired was now a symbol of greed and betrayal. The aftermath of this incident was too harsh. Madoff's wife, Ruth, distanced herself from the scandal, while his sons faced intense public scrutiny. Mark, unable to bear the weight of the shame, tragically took his own life 2 years later. Andrew, battling cancer, died in 2014. The Madoff name, once associated with success and wealth, had become a symbol of deceit. Madoff's empire had fallen, not with a dramatic explosion, but with the slow, painful collapse of lies being exposed to the light.
After being caught, Madoff's assets, including real estate, yachts, and jewelry, were seized and sold by the feds to reimburse his victims. As of September 2022, only about $4 billion had been returned to 40,000 victims. As we speak, Bernie Madoff is no longer among us. In April 2021, he died in a federal correctional facility at the age of 82. Even in prison, he was no less than a celebrity. His inmates were curious about him, often asking questions about his financial scheme or seeking investment advice. He worked in the prison's commissary, where he handled inventory and bookkeeping, an ironic role considering his history of financial fraud.
In his last days, he had developed a kidney disease, and in 2020, he petitioned for early release on compassionate grounds, citing his poor health and life expectancy. He expressed regret for the pain he had caused, claiming that he had nightmares about the victims of his scheme. However, the judge denied his request, arguing that Madoff's crimes were too severe to allow for early release, regardless of his health issues. Bernie Madoff has often been shown as a villain in the media and pop culture. In a 2009 episode of HBO's Curb Your Enthusiasm, the actor Jason Alexander, famous for playing George on Seinfeld, loses all his money after being tricked by Madoff. Characters like Madoff also appeared in Woody Allen's movie Blue Jasmine and in Eleanor Lipman's novel The View from Penthouse B. In 2017, Robert De Niro played Madoff in the HBO movie The Wizard of Lies. Several documentaries and books have also told the story of Madoff's crimes and his downfall. It shows that even if negative, the charm of Bernie Madoff had something about it that made it to the big screens. Nonetheless, this scam story teaches us not to fall for charms. Your greed can have severe consequences, hence beware of scams, and hit that subscribe button so we can get you another scam story as quickly as possible.